From downtown Nashville inside the historic Ryman Auditorium, we're celebrating more than 125 years of the Mother Church of Country Music and many artists' legacy. Up on the stage of the Mother Church of Country Music, center stage, kind of paints a picture, cultivating everything that they've been working for their entire career and their entire life. And we welcome in the one and only and iconic of Americana and country music, Rodney Crowell. Welcome in.
How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good.
You traveled into Nashville, and you've even got a full song about it. Nashville in 1972. Mm-hmm. This would have been before the Opry made its official move to the current Grand Ole Opry House in 74.
True.
So did you ever attend any of the Opry shows here from 72 to 74?
I did.
Yeah.
I remember very distinctly the one and only time between 72 and 74. It must have been springtime in 73. I came down and sat across over there and to see the show, to see the Grand Ole Opry. Now, the most vivid memory I have of it is Marty Robbins. Seems as though they gave him an extended show.
They always talk about how like he just, it didn't matter what time they gave him the curtain.
Yeah.
He just kept going.
Yeah, he must have played a half hour.
Uh-huh.
And he wowed the audience. He was so dynamic and charming, and I was really moved by it. You know, I always liked his records. I was more of a Hank Williams and Buck Owens, you know, the honky-tonkers.
Mm-hmm.
I never really thought of Marty Robbins. You know, he was a balladeer, and I was really impressed with his performance. Stuck with me for a long time. A very generous, very expansive performance. Now, the Grand Ole Opry was always, or the Ryman Auditorium, I referred to it as the Grand Ole Opry. To me, this building was the Grand Ole Opry because my father wanted to be a country singer, and he was actually, I think in the end, a better singer than me. But it wasn't in the cards for him. You know, he was stuck, you know, working construction in Houston. But he always told me, he says, you know, you need to go to the Grand Ole Opry. That's where you need to go. That's where I should have gone. And so I was always on my way here.
Yeah.
And the first time I performed here must have been, it was in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. As part of the Grand Ole Opry, or during the sort of the dark years as a side show?
Okay. My memory is, no, you know, the first time I played the Grand Ole Opry was actually out in Briley Parkway.
Yeah, the big house.
So maybe the first time I played here in the Ryman Auditorium, if memory, it might have been Levon Helm's Midnight Ramble.
Mm-hmm.
Might have been. It seems they're all kind of. When did they start doing shows again here?
Well, Emmylou did her show in '92.
Okay.
And I think that sort of brought it back a little bit.
Well, I was in attendance.
You were
for that show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's they still did shows, but it was still considered the dark period. I know there was some filming. They still had the tours open. They still filmed some of the Johnny Cash show here, but for the most part, it didn't. It wasn't
on its way
revitalized
out until
in the early '90s.
Until Emmy did that show.
Yeah,
good for her.
It's fascinating when you go back and listen to that record. I mean, some friends and I've talked about it. She's even almost desperately talking about how this place needs to be restored, and it's almost like she's willing the audience to believe in the place as well.
Yeah,
and I think that she just did an incredible job breathing new life back into this building.
Yeah, I'm glad folks paid attention.
Mm-hmm. So when did you first get connected with Emmylou?
Emmylou and I met in the fall of 1974 in Washington, D.C. And she had recorded, her first album was coming out in the early spring of 1975, and she had recorded a couple of my songs, one of which went on the album. So I flew out to Washington, D.C. to meet her, and because, you know, she heard something in my songs, you know, kindred spirit. And you know, I went to one of her shows, and we spent, you know, a couple of days just sitting on the floor playing songs. And and just trading stories about songs, and became fast friends. So when she moved to California in early spring, well, actually winter of '75, she invited me to come out. So I moved to California, to Los Angeles, with Emmylou actually in January 1975.
Mm-hmm. So you had 2, 3, maybe 4 years here in Nashville.
2.5. 2.5.
So building relationships here. I mean, that's always one of the first things when you get into town, is starting to meet people, find your community, find out who you relate to. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes it's what part of town best fits you.
Yeah.
Take me back to 1972 and getting to town.
I fell. Well, first of all, I was homeless, living in my car.
Really?
And so Centennial Park was where we would go during the day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's face it, to see if we could meet a girl that would take us in,
mm-hmm.
my buddy and I. And as it turns out, you know, I learned about Bishop's Pub, where you could pass the hat and pick up a few dollars.
Yeah.
And so I went down there and started playing, and ran into I became friendly with Skinny Dennis Sanchez, who introduced me to Guy Clark, and Susanna Clark, who became my close friends, as was Skinny Dennis. But Dennis passed away in 1975, young, age 26. He was too young to go.
Wow.
So I fell in with Guy Clark and Susanna Clark, and through Guy, I met Mickey Newberry and Townes Van Zandt, and David Only. I met him at Bishop's Pub, and Steve Earle, and met Lucinda. So the group of us songwriters, you know, we're just 2 steps from the street. But I got discovered by Harry Warner. You know, they say discovered.
Mm-hmm.
Harry Warner managed Jerry Reed. And I was playing the happy hour at the old Jolly Ox in Green Hills. And I had been given orders by my boss if I played an original song, I would be fired on the spot.
Yeah.
Which seemed strange for Nashville. But at the time, you know, they wanted to sell drinks. They didn't want some navel gazer up there.
I'm sure you get that a little bit on Broadway in 2018. You know, everybody's got to follow the formula of
probably,
of
perhaps.
famous.
But, you know, I just had enough, and I was having I did find a girl to take me in, and it was backfiring on me. So I wrote this angry song called You Can't Keep Me Here in Tennessee. And in the middle of my happy hour set, I played it. And my boss came down the aisle. There was 2 aisles, you know, down to the stage. And he said, I told you if you played original song. And I announced it. You know, I just wrote this last night. And he said, you're fired. And Harry Warner just happened to be walking up. And he said, well, okay, good, because we want to hire him as a songwriter, and we want to record that song tomorrow.
That's quite the leap of faith, right there.
It was great.
Yeah.
And this was actually 1973.
Yeah.
Early in 73 by then. And so, and they said, well, come down to the studio tomorrow, RCA big studio, and, you know, you can teach the musicians the songs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went around the next day, and I went early because I didn't want to miss anything. And I walked into Studio A, into the control room, and Chet Atkins was sitting at the recording console.
Yeah.
Just him. I was, what do I do? And he said, did you write this song we're going to record? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, come over here, let me tell you. Let me explain to you how this works. And he explained the mic chain to me. And then Weldon Myrick and Henry Strelecki and all these Dave Kirby, all these musicians started walking. Buddy Harmon, you know, I knew Buddy Harmon from Everly Brothers Records, you know, and there I was. This is Nashville, you know.
So this is your first time ever being in a major studio like this in RCA Studio A.
RCA Studio A, Chet Atkins. And this was before cell phones. If I'd only had a cell phone to call somebody and say, you know what I'm doing. It was beautiful. It was really great. I don't think, and it seems like my whole career has been that way. It seems like at just certain moments, a door opens and I walk through, and there's really great things going on.
That's fascinating. I mean, the years of the music that you put out, of course, you were touring with Emmylou, a part of the hot band for a few years, but then coming back to do everything solo in the late 70s, early 80s, finding your footing in country music and, blowing the doors quite literally off the hinges in the world of country music. Then you fast forward into the 90s and into the 2000s, and it seemed like you sort of found your voice, something that you could do yourself, your own path.
Yeah. It's evolution, it's artistic evolution. I was not entirely comfortable. My 15 minutes of quote-unquote fame was not the most comfortable time for me. I didn't handle it. I mean, I didn't go off on a drinking binge or anything, but one of the things I'm a pretty shy, introverted guy. I'm an extrovert on stage, but I found that people looking at me when I entered buildings and things, because I was being noticed, I became real self-conscious, and it really occurred to me, I said, if self-consciousness is really what causes you to really go stagnant as an artist. So I think in some ways I purposely kind of turned to a more singular point of view rather than trying to chase hit records. I settled into enjoying a kind of a middle of the pack career, but I think my work is really recognized and revered by a lot of people. So I don't think my work is looked at as middle of the pack. I think I enjoy a certain elevated status as a songwriter and performer and artist. But in terms of the economics and the everyday of this entertainment game, I'm just middle class performer, and that seems to suit me really well.
Throughout all that time of hitting the mainstream country music world, did you stay close and connected to folks like Guy Clark and Townes Van Zandt and Susanna Clark?
Well, I'm sad to say no.
Yeah.
I stayed. They were my friends, but I got really busy.
But it was those first few years of being in town that you built those relationships.
I built those relationships, and then I kind of got on a rocket ship for a moment, and my friends like Guy and Townes, they were folk singers and songwriters, and they were functioning at a level, and I was functioning they were functioning at the level I'm functioning at now. But for a minute up there, I went into the stratosphere, and I'm sad to say that I got so preoccupied for a couple of years there, I was not easy to reach. And I think I was just trying to figure out who I was in that strata, and gradually got my feet back on the ground and started working toward what I just described, and hooked back up with my friends who forgave me for my snobbery.
In what you're talking about, where Guy Clark and Townes Van Zandt would have been in that time where you are now, do you feel that there's some sort of energy today in some of the singer-songwriters or folks who are coming up in the Americana music world who have that same kind of... It feels like there's something energetic about today's... you could consider it country music in the 70s, and now it's considered, it has a home within Americana just because there's such a defined line of this is country, this is Americana.
Well,
I
mean, it's a very simple thing. There is what is now called country music is a very commercial arm, and there are some artists within that realm who are highly functioning commercial artists. And doing work that's really true to themselves, and it's true artistry, and it strikes a nerve, and it makes a lot of money for the machine, And then there are artists who are more drawn toward the poetry and the storytelling aspect, the closer to the ground, closer to Townes Van Zandt, Mickey Newberry, the artists like that are admired by young artists coming up, and I think occasionally I meet some of them who were admire and were inspired by me, and when that happens, I think, wow, that's good. It's like I came up, I was inspired by Kris Kristofferson and John Prine.
Mm-hmm.
Kris Kristofferson is now considered an Americana artist, but at one time he was the premier country songwriter. And so those lines are blurred, but when people ask me about define, what's Americana, and I said, well, country music is hit records on the radio, and Americana is the rest of us. Now, I can say that with confidence because I've written a lot of hit songs, in my day that went right down the middle in the commercial field. So I satisfied, all my artistic longings were satisfied with that kind of success.
If you were to write a song right now for mainstream country, could you say, okay, this is the formula, this is kind of the cookie cutter way to write a song that's going to be a hit in country music today versus something that you would write and sing yourself?
Oh, I couldn't do that.
You couldn't do that?
I couldn't write a formula song.
Mm-hmm.
It just wouldn't, I couldn't summon the energy for it.
Mm-hmm.
It, mind you, I admire and appreciate those who can, and, God bless them. But it's not the way I'm made. It's, going all the way back to when I first heard Hank Williams, there was some kind of heartbreak or human experience involved in the music that I heard that all along, even when the Beatles came and Bob Dylan came, there was something about it that spoke about the human condition that was not made up in the head, seemed to come from the heart. I'm not good at making up things from the head. Clever. I mean, I'm funny and I can be clever, but if you want to put me on the spot and say write something clever, I'm going to fail. But if you leave me alone, I might go off and write something that's really meaningful from the heart.
You released a Christmas record that I think is incredibly clever. A lot of the songs on there
is clever,
are dark, but they're funny. There's humor
clever
behind it. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Kind of culminated in your very own Christmas album.
It did.
What was sort of the energy and the inspiration behind this album?
I had gotten into a funk about Christmas, the commercialization of it, coming around. I'd gotten older. So I got in a funk about it. And my wife and grown children were starting to, pull me aside and say, Dad, you got to pull out of this. This is not fun. You're better than this. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, I'm going to make a Christmas album. I'm going to write my way out of this. And I did. And it funny that I was just talking about, unable to do something clever, but now when I realize I wrote When the Fat Guy Tries a Chimney on for Sides, that's pretty clever.
It's clever.
Yeah. Okay. I need to back off my statement about not being able to write clever songs.
No, you're good at it. Yeah, it's definitely on display within this new record. And you invited some incredible, Americana, considered Americana or country, singer-songwriters, and as well, I know Brennan Lee was a part of it.
Brennan Lee, yeah.
She's fantastic.
Yeah, she is. She's beautifully fantastic, as is Lyra Lynn, who came, and I did a collaboration with the poet, memoirist, and language scholar Mary Carr, who's from the same area in Texas that I'm from, and she's a brilliant writer, and I actually got her to perform on it, which is, she's a natural performer, and would have never thought, she was kicking and screaming into the studio, but then once I got her in there, she came through big time.
That's fantastic. Did you find a comfort level of being in the studio? Was that
eventually,
the problem?
Eventually, well, she's a professional writer, and she understands that you come up against the walls inside yourself as you're trying to break through to find the narrative, to break through to where the flow comes through to you. Mm-hmm. And I just kept telling her, I said, performing onto that microphone is just like writing. You just keep doing it until you break through. And when you break through, you'll find the flow. and she broke through, and she had the flow. Her take on that recording is just beginning to end. It was fun to watch because she'd never been recorded like that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's special. Another great album you put out here in 2018 was kind of revisit of some of the songs that you've had hit records on or other people have recorded and had hit songs on, just acoustic versions of your songs. And one that really stuck out to me, one that I grew up listening to on the radio in my hometown, was of Keith Urban's Making Memories of Us.
Where's your hometown?
Newcastle, Indiana.
Newcastle. All right, as they would say in England, Newcastle.
Yeah. We're about a small town about 45 miles east of Indianapolis.
Making Memories of Us. Yeah. I wrote that on Valentine's Day for my wife, Claudia, who is going to be here in a minute. I didn't have any dinner plans, or I hadn't ordered flowers. I was still in my pajamas when I got a phone call from one of my daughters who said, "Dad, you still in your pajamas?" Because I can work in my pajamas, you know, or my sweatpants. They're not really pajamas. But she said, "It's Valentine's Day." I said, "Oh, God." So I ran down into my studio and was thinking, God, this has got to be good. I got to come up with something. And I wrote it. And it's not often that I write one that quick. Mm-hmm. And that complete usually takes a lot of revision and a lot of time. But I knew it was about her, and it was just the truth about her, making memories of us. I didn't know that I would love somebody like that in my time. I certainly had been married before and been deeply committed and loved, but with her, with Claudia, it became something more than I ever expected it to be. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking that's what that song says.
It's fascinating listening to that. I had to go listen to the Keith Urban version after I heard your version again, just to kind of take me back to when I'd listened to it when I was younger, and his voice is so polished within that performance. I mean, he's an incredibly polished singer.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what I said when someone asked me, and the same thing with Please Remember Me. It was another song of mine which Tim McGraw made a big hit from. And that was the song where I tried to, early in my relationship with Claudia, where I tried to say goodbye through song and take the coward's way out. But in the case of Keith singing Making Memories of Us, I said to someone, I said, look, Keith is singing that song to the whole world. I wrote it and I sing that song to one person. When I sing it, I'm singing it directly to Claudia. Even the nights that I do it in my live show with my trio that I have, I'm still mostly singing it to her. And Keith did the right thing. He sang it to the world. Mm-hmm. And I was always really grateful that he did that, because my version was never gonna be like that. I think people I think in the world of hit record making, people understand subconsciously that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You could hear me and that guy's singing it. I mean, subconsciously, you go, he's singing it to that one person, but Keith Urban is singing it to me. So Keith really, and let's face it, Keith is a handsome, sex symbol, so he's a fantasy. So when he sings that song, it fulfills a fantasy.
To hear his version versus your version, to the way you're saying he's singing it to the world, you're singing it to one person, I feel it almost as if, in a way, whenever I listen to him, it is a song about a young couple who had just gotten together talking about all the memories they're going to make. Mm-hmm. When I hear you sing it, it's kind of like you've lived those memories and you're kind of flipping through a picture book, looking back on all those memories. Yeah. So it's the power of music and being in interpretive art. It's amazing how you can take the same song and the same lyrics and the same melody and have two completely different feelings from it.
True. Isn't that beautiful that can happen? Yeah, I like that. Mm-hmm. I like that can happen. And oftentimes, when someone else does one of my songs, sometimes their version of it has helped me understand what the song actually means. Mm. I may have written it but I didn't really get it until I heard somebody else do it.
I was going to ask you if there's ever a song that you've written that you go back and listen to 20 years later and it means something completely different.
Yeah. Oftentimes. And for instance, Bob Seger singing Shame on the Moon,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, my most successful song. He did something with that song that made me stop performing it, and it became his song. That
Mm-hmm.
song is entirely his. I don't perform it live. I did a rewrite of it on the Acoustic Classics because I wanted to try something out, but I didn't even attempt to sing it because Bob Seger owns that song. And I told him, I said, "It's yours, brother." I collected some money for it, but it's his.
Is it tough to hand off a song like that you know?
No.
No.
No. I mean, I always say, if somebody comes to me and they don't like a version of my song
Mm-hmm.
that somebody's done, and I'll say, well, that's okay, I'm grateful that they've done my song. If there's a particular way I want to hear it, that's the way I'll do it. I'll do it. You want to hear it in a certain way? Let me see if I can satisfy you with it.
Mm-hmm.
And early on in my career, I would sometimes be judgmental and pass judgment or make an opinion about someone's recording of my song. Maybe I didn't like their version, but I learned pretty quickly, man, I'm just grateful that they thought enough of the song to record it in the first place. And if I have any kind of opinion that's negative, that stays inside me.
Mm-hmm.
If I really like somebody's, I'll be effusive and tell them how much, but I'm not going to tell somebody I didn't like what they did with my song. I'm grateful that they did it, and if I want to hear another version, I should take care of that myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, here we are on a Saturday night in Nashville, Tennessee. You're going to be up on stage at the Ryman,
At the Ryman.
the Big Ryman for a
Yeah,
Grand Ole Opry
is
show.
cool.
So with us kind of looking back at your career and talking a little bit since you arrived in 1972, all the way up to a day like today, all the way into 2018, celebrating a Saturday night center stage on the Ryman, the Mother Church of Country Music. When you look back at your career, what do you think about when you stand center stage at a place that's celebrating 125, coming up on 126 years?
Yeah, well, from the time that I started performing here at the Ryman at whatever that date was when it came back online, if it were with Levon or certainly I was here with the Down from the Mountain tour, and I probably performed on this stage 30 times in my career. And early on, I made a decision that every time I walk onto that stage, I say a little prayer before I go out there, and a prayer to center myself in to really taking in the experience and really being present for the experience, because it's an experience. I think of my dad. It would have been, the pinnacle in his life to be able to go on that stage and do it. I think of him, but even more than thinking of him, I think about, I want to give myself the gift of being fully aware of where I am, fully aware of the history, fully aware of how many great performances have been given, how many artists that I admired so greatly, were on that stage, and, and it's still going, and I get to be a part of it. Man, my gratitude runs high for that, and I can never take it lightly.
You said you've been up there nearly 30 times or so. You're going to get another 12 coming up with Amy Grant and
true.
Vince Gill.
Oh, man, I'm going to break 50 before
before the end of the year.
Yeah.
That's got to be a special thing, being able to
that's-
hang out with Vince.
Yeah,
and
with Vince and
Vince
Amy.
and
That's
Amy.
when we decided to do it. It's like Vince and Amy. We said, well, we can hang out together because we're always off somewhere else, And so, yeah, that's 12 nights at the Ryman.
I've looked at it. Last year they did 10, sold out all 10. and they've increased 2 shows, so there's going to be 12 this year. All of them nearly sold out at this point.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a fun run.
It will be. And I thought they always did 12 because on the 12th day of Christmas, I thought that was the, I've been a couple of times to see their show, and it's like I loved it, and Amy, Vince is, himself there, but Amy, she brings something to the show that's, Amy's not really a comedian, but she has some of that elegance that Minnie Pearl had, and I always really admired and loved Minnie Pearl. Got to know her personally, and I had a lot of, I seem to be lucky in that Minnie Pearl and I may have had 3 or 4 conversations with grocery baskets in Kroger's.
Mm-hmm.
We just ran into each other in Green Hills Kroger, and had conversations that have stuck with me. And I was thinking about, watching Amy perform. I said, she's just got some of that classic charm and grace that Minnie Pearl had.
Mm. It's one of the fascinating things, just talking about seeing people in Kroger, the fascinating things about Nashville. You can go into some place like Arnold's, Meat and 3, and run into John Prine, or just anywhere around
Brown's
town.
Diner.
Yeah. There's something special about this town. So there's something that can be said for it being a small, big city, or a big, small city, however you want to consider it. But the fact that there's such a great musical community here in Nashville, I think that's one of the first things people try to crack, is find who their friends are and who they're going to surround themselves with when they first get here. So if you could go back to 1972, and give yourself a piece of advice coming into Nashville as you were driving in, what would that be?
If I were to give myself a piece of advice when I was driving into Nashville at 3 a.m. on August the 8th, 1972, the day after I turned 22, I would say, breathe deep and pay attention to everything that happens from here on. The only regrets I have were the times when I wasn't really paying attention, because there's so much to pay attention to. The potential for collaboration in Nashville, Tennessee is greater than anywhere in the world musically. That's my opinion. There's musicians that are just so gifted. And, some of Texas musicians who have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder about Nashville and the quote-unquote commercial side of it, the corporation, I always say, hey, that corporation is spitting out checks to some really great artists who can raise a family, and Bela Fleck can play banjo like a genius, occasionally it spits out a check, or John Jorgensen, or all of these musicians that are so gifted. The business itself takes care of its own here. And I'm in. I'm not leaving.
Rodney Crowell with us inside the Ryman Radio Booth. We have the perfect picturesque backdrop here for this interview, looking at the wooden pews, the stained glass windows to the left, on our way tonight to a big Grand Ole Opry show. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah. Grand Ole Opry in the Ryman.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Take it in when you're up there, like you said.
I will.
Always being present.
Watch me do it. I will.
Thank you very much for taking the time to talk about your career in the Ryman Auditorium.
Thank you. My pleasure.